I still remember the sound of the rain that morning. It wasn't heavy, just a quiet drizzle tapping against the kitchen window, like a soft warning I didn't understand. The kind of rain that makes you slow down, if only for a moment, and listen. But that day I didn't listen. Not to the rain, and not to him. His name was Daniel. My husband for 22 years. A man of few words, gentle eyes, and a heart that carried more than he ever said. We had built a life together, small, simple, and steady. A little yellow house on Maple Street, 2 grown kids who had already left home, and routines that wrapped around us like familiar blankets. Morning coffee together, quiet dinners, weekend walks to the market, all the little things that felt ordinary until they weren't. I didn't know then that those small moments were his way of speaking. That every shared silence, every tired smile, was him trying to tell me something he couldn't put into words. I wish I had known that morning started like any other. I was making breakfast, eggs, toast, and that same cup of coffee he always said was too strong. He sat at the kitchen table, his newspaper open, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose. From where I stood, I could see the side of his face, soft in the morning light. He looked older than I remembered, lines tracing the corners of his eyes, a quiet tiredness that hadn't been there before. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, not really looking up. He took a moment before answering. "Not much," he said, "just thinking." I smiled faintly. "About what?" He shook his head. "Nothing important," and I let it go. I turned back to the stove, flipping the eggs, humming a tune from some old radio song. I didn't see the way he looked at me, like he wanted to say something, but the words just wouldn't come. He cleared his throat softly. "Anna," he said, almost like he was testing the sound of my name. I glanced over my shoulder. He hesitated. Then he said, "We should take that trip we talked about. The coast. Remember?" I laughed lightly. "The one we've been talking about for 10 years? He smiled. "Yeah, that one." "Well," I said, "maybe this summer. After the garden's sorted out." He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. If I close my eyes now, I can still see the look on his face, quiet disappointment, hidden behind understanding. I thought he was just tired, but maybe he was giving me one last chance to hear him. We met in the spring of 1998. I was 24, working at a small bookstore downtown. He came in looking for a birthday gift for his sister, but spent an hour talking to me instead. He had this way of listening that made you feel like you were saying something worth hearing. When he laughed, his eyes crinkled, and he always paused before he spoke, like he wanted to get every word right. He wasn't the loud, romantic type. He was quiet, steady, reliable. The kind of man who would fix your sink before you even realized it was leaking. The kind of man who'd stay up all night beside your hospital bed when you caught the flu. He loved through actions, not words, and maybe that's why I stopped listening. Because after years of that kind of love, you start to think it'll always be there. You start to take silence as comfort, not a cry for help. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Until it wasn't. It began slowly, the distance. We still ate at the same table, but the conversations became shorter. He'd ask about my day. I'd tell him about work. Then we'd both fall silent, letting the television fill the room with noise that neither of us really heard. He'd sometimes sit outside on the porch long after sunset, just watching the streetlights flicker. I'd call from inside, "You're going to catch a cold out there." He'd just wave his hand, not turning around. One evening, I joined him. The air was cool and the world smelled like rain. He looked at me and smiled, that small, tired smile again. "You ever feel like time's moving faster?" He asked. I laughed. "Every year. Especially after 50. He nodded. "I feel like I'm running out of it." I frowned. "You're being dramatic, Daniel." He chuckled softly. "Maybe, but he wasn't. That was a year before I lost him. Sometimes I think about all the chances I had to really listen. The quiet dinners, the half-finished sentences, the mornings he lingered by the door before leaving for work, the times he'd reach for my hand, then pull away as if he'd changed his mind. I always told myself we were fine, that silence meant peace, not distance. But silence can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it's love, and sometimes it's someone slowly giving up on being heard. One evening, I came home late from visiting my sister. The house was dark except for the small lamp by his chair. He was sitting there reading something, a letter, I think. When he noticed me, he quickly folded it and set it aside. I didn't ask about it. I just said, "You didn't have to wait up." He smiled faintly. "Didn't feel like sleeping? Long day?" I asked. He nodded. Something like that. And that was it. Another chance to ask. Another moment gone. Later, I found that same letter in his drawer. But not until it was too late. Daniel had always been healthy, or so I thought. He rarely complained. Even when he was tired, he'd say he was just fine. He worked at a local hardware store after retiring from his old job in construction. He liked staying busy, helping people fix things. "Keeps me sharp," he used to say. But over time, I noticed small things. He'd rub his chest sometimes after walking up the stairs. He'd nap longer in the afternoons. He started forgetting where he put things. I told him it was just age catching up. He smiled and agreed, but I should have looked closer. I should have asked. One night, as we sat watching an old movie, he reached over and took my hand. It startled me a little. It had been a while since he'd done that. His hand was cold. He looked at me, eyes soft, and said, "You know I love you, right?" I laughed, almost teasing. "Of course. After 22 years, I better know." He smiled, but there was something different in his eyes, something that made my stomach twist. He squeezed my hand gently. "I just want to make sure," he whispered. If I had really been listening, I would have heard the goodbye in his voice. But I just smiled and turned back to the movie. When you live with someone for so long, you stop hearing the things that matter most. You start hearing routines instead of words. "Did you eat? Drive safe. Don't forget your coat." All those little phrases that sound like love but sometimes hide everything we don't say. If I had known that morning, that rainy, ordinary morning, would be the last time I'd see him alive, I would have stopped what I was doing. I would have turned around, looked into his eyes, and said, "Tell me what's on your mind." But I didn't. I told him breakfast was ready. He smiled, got up, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll be home early." He wasn't. That's where the story begins for me. Not with his death, but with the silence that came before it. Because the truth is, sometimes the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's realizing all the ways they tried to reach you before they were gone. And every night since that day, I've replayed those quiet moments in my head. The pauses, the glances, the unfinished sentences. Each one feels like a whisper I ignored. That's what hurts the most. Not that he left, but that he tried to tell me, and I wasn't listening. After that morning, life went on as if nothing had changed. I still made breakfast every day, packed his lunch, watered the garden, folded his shirts. The world looked the same, smelled the same, sounded the same. But something invisible had shifted. I could feel it, even if I didn't understand it then. He came home from work later that week, slower than usual. His hands were trembling slightly when he hung his jacket by the door. I noticed it but said nothing. He sat down at the table and looked out the window for a long time before speaking. "It's getting darker earlier," he said quietly. I smiled. "It's autumn, Daniel. The days are shorter." He nodded, still watching the fading light. "Seems like they're shorter every year." I don't know why that line stayed with me, but it did. He said it softly, not as a complaint, not even as an observation, but like he was counting the moments he had left. That evening, he didn't touch his dinner. When I asked if something was wrong, he smiled and said, "Just not hungry tonight." Then he went out to the porch and sat there until long after I'd gone to bed. In the days that followed, he became quieter. Not in a dramatic way, just gentler, more withdrawn. He'd sit by the window, tracing the edge of his coffee mug with one finger, lost in thought. Sometimes I'd find him looking through old photo albums, ones I hadn't opened in years. One Sunday morning, I found him in the living room surrounded by photographs. Our wedding picture, the kids' first day of school, vacations, birthdays, a whole life laid out across the floor. "What are you doing?" I asked. He smiled softly. "Just remembering." I laughed lightly. "You sound like an old man." He looked up at me then, and his voice trembled a little. "I am an old man, Anna." I wanted to tell him he wasn't, that he still had time. But I just smiled, kissed his forehead, and said, "Well, old man, breakfast is ready." He chuckled, but his eyes didn't match his laughter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way he'd looked at those photos. like he was saying goodbye without saying the words. I told myself I was overthinking it, that maybe he was just feeling nostalgic. But deep down, something unsettled me. In the days that followed, I tried to pay closer attention. When he coughed, I asked if he was okay. When he skipped meals, I reminded him to eat. But every time, he brushed it off with a smile and a gentle, "I'm fine." Daniel was the kind of man who carried everyone else's worries, but never shared his own. Even when he was in pain, he'd say, "Don't fuss over me. Anna, I'm okay." And I, foolishly, believed him. One evening, I came home from the grocery store and found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. The groceries slipped from my arms as I walked toward him. "Daniel, are you all right?" He looked up and smiled weakly. "Yeah, just tired." His face looked pale. I reached for his hand. It was cold and slightly shaking. "Maybe you should see a doctor," I said. He hesitated. "It's nothing serious." "Daniel," I said firmly, "you've been tired for weeks. Please." He nodded, but I could tell it was just to end the conversation. The next morning, he told me he had an appointment scheduled for the following week. I believed him, but later I found out he never went. We had our 23rd anniversary that month. I made his favorite dinner, roasted chicken with lemon and thyme. He brought home flowers, small white daisies, my favorite. We sat by the window, candles flickering between us. It should have been a beautiful night, and it was, in a way, but there was something different about him that evening. Softer, quieter. Like he was trying to memorize me. He reached across the table, held my hand and said, "You've given me a good life, Anna." I laughed. "Don't talk like that. You make it sound like it's over." He smiled. "No, just grateful, that's all." After dinner, he played an old record, the same one we danced to on our wedding night. He held me close as we swayed in the living room, the sound of soft jazz filling the air. His heartbeat was slower than I remembered. I leaned my head on his chest, and for the first time in years, we didn't need words. If I had known what that night truly was, a goodbye disguised as gratitude, I would have held on tighter. A week later, he collapsed at work. They said it happened quickly. One moment he was helping a customer lift something heavy, and the next, he was on the floor. A heart attack, they said. Severe, unexpected. When the phone rang that afternoon, I was baking bread. I remember the smell of yeast, the flour on my hands, the way time stopped when I heard the voice on the other end. By the time I reached the hospital, it was too late. They told me he was gone before the ambulance arrived. The world went silent. Completely, painfully silent. I stood there, my hands trembling, staring at the doctor's lips move, but I couldn't hear a word. All I could think was, he tried to tell me. The funeral came and went in a blur. People hugged me, brought food, said kind things. He was such a good man. You were lucky to have him. He loved you so much. And every word cut deeper because I knew it was true. He did love me. He tried to show me, even at the end. And I didn't listen. After everyone left, I sat alone in our bedroom. His jacket was still hanging by the door. His watch lay on the bedside table. The bed smelled faintly of his cologne, and on his nightstand was a letter. Folded neatly, with my name written in his handwriting. I didn't open it that night. I couldn't. It felt like opening it would make his death real. But the next morning, when the house was quiet and the light from the window touched the paper, I finally did. It wasn't long, just a page. His words were simple, gentle, like his voice. "Anna, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't get the chance to say it properly. I know I haven't always been good at speaking my mind, but you've been my peace for more than 2 decades. Don't blame yourself for the quiet. You filled my days with more love than you realize. I just wish I'd told you sooner when things started to change. My health, my fears, the tiredness I couldn't shake. I didn't want to worry you. You've always carried so much. Please forgive me for not letting you carry this too. I love you, always. Daniel." I held that letter for a long time. The paper trembled in my hands as I realized how much he'd been trying to tell me. In his silence, in his tired eyes, in those small moments I brushed aside. And for the first time, I really listened. The house felt too big after that. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, echoed louder than ever before. I began to replay every memory, every small sign I'd ignored. The night he wanted to talk, but I was too busy finishing a report. The time he offered to go for a walk, and I said I was tired. The way he'd sometimes look at me like he was trying to memorize my face. They all came back to me, one by one, like a movie I didn't want to watch. And through it all, one thought kept repeating in my mind. He tried to tell me, but I wasn't listening. The morning after the funeral, I woke to silence. A silence so heavy it felt alive. The kind that presses against your chest until breathing becomes a decision. I sat up slowly, eyes swollen from crying, and looked around our room. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, landing on the space beside me, his side of the bed, still untouched. For a moment, I almost turned to call his name. Habit is strange like that. Even when someone's gone, your heart still expects an answer. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty pillow, the indent still shaped like him. And I whispered, "What were you trying to tell me, Daniel?" The next few weeks passed in fragments. People came by with casseroles, kind words, and stories about him, things I'd never known. The neighbor, Mrs. Reed, said he used to fix her fence every spring without ever mentioning it. The mailman said Daniel would always ask about his wife, who'd been sick. Even the little boy down the street, the one who sold lemonade in the summers, told me, "Mr. Daniel always tipped me double. He had been carrying kindness everywhere, quietly." And I realized how many pieces of him lived in others, pieces I'd never seen because I was too focused on the noise of life. I started going through his things slowly. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. There were bills to manage, clothes to fold, letters to sort. Each drawer felt like opening a chapter of our story I hadn't finished reading. In the top drawer of his desk, I found a small leather notebook. Worn edges, soft cover. His handwriting on the front, thoughts. I almost didn't open it, afraid of what I might find, or maybe afraid of what I wouldn't. But something inside me whispered, "Listen this time." The first page was dated 2 years earlier. His handwriting, neat but fading in some places, read, "Anna worries too much about everything except herself. I wish she'd sit with me a little longer in the evenings. I miss the sound of her laughter when it wasn't tired. I felt my throat tighten." I turned the page. I don't know how to tell her about the doctor's visit. They said it's not serious yet, but it could become so. She's already carrying too much. I'll tell her when I'm sure. Page after page, his quiet voice filled the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. Entries about his work, his health, his worries about our kids. And so much love, love written between the lines, gentle and patient. She still makes the best coffee, even when she says it's too strong. I like it that way. It reminds me of her, warm and steady. I pressed the notebook to my chest and cried. Not the loud kind of crying, but the kind that shakes quietly inside you. Because it felt like he was sitting beside me again, finally speaking, and this time, I was listening. Days turned into weeks. I found comfort in small routines. I'd make coffee in the morning, just like I used to, and sit by the window where he once read his newspaper. Sometimes I'd read his notebook out loud, not because I needed to, but because hearing his words in the air made him feel closer. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the attic, I found a small wooden box tucked behind an old suitcase. Inside were envelopes, a dozen of them, each labeled with a year. Every envelope had a letter addressed to me. The first one said, Year 1, 1999. It was our first anniversary. He had written, "You told me today that marriage feels ordinary after a year. I smiled because I think ordinary with you is exactly what I want for the rest of my life." I read each one slowly, letting his voice wash over me. Every letter captured a piece of our story, our fights, our laughter, our quiet mornings, our shared dreams. He had been writing to me all these years, keeping a record of his love. And I never knew. By the time I reached the last envelope labeled Year 22, my hands were trembling. It was dated just 3 weeks before he died. "Anna, I don't know if I'll be around for the next letter. I hope I am. But if not, I want you to know something. You were my peace. I know we had our silences, our seasons of distance, but I never stopped loving you. Even in quiet, you were everything I needed. Please don't carry regret. Just listen to the rain sometimes. That's me, reminding you to slow down. Yours always, Daniel." I couldn't finish reading. I placed the letter back in the box and sat there, surrounded by dust and sunlight, crying softly into my hands. He had been trying to tell me all along. Through his gestures, through his silences, through every ordinary moment I thought was nothing. And now, through his letters, he finally had. That night I made 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for him. I placed his cup on the table across from mine, the steam rising in the quiet room. "I hear you now, Daniel," I whispered. "I hear every word. For the first time in months, I felt peace. A kind of peace that doesn't come from forgetting, but from finally understanding." A few days later, our daughter Emily came to visit. She looked so much like him. The same calm eyes, the same quiet smile. She hugged me tight and said, "Mom, you look better today." I smiled. "I found something." We sat at the kitchen table as I told her about the letters. Her eyes filled with tears as she listened. "Dad was always like that," she said. "He never said much, but he always meant everything he did." I handed her one of the letters to read. She wiped her tears and whispered, "He must have loved you so much." I nodded. He did. I just didn't know how to hear it. Emily reached across the table and held my hand. "It's not your fault, Mom," she said gently. "We all miss things when we think we have more time." Her words stayed with me. We all think we have more time. Over the next few weeks, I started writing too. Not because I thought anyone would read it, but because it felt like a way to talk to him. Every evening, I'd write in the same notebook he once used, my handwriting beside his, our voices finally sharing a page. "Dear Daniel, I had coffee by the window today. The roses are blooming early this year. I wish you could see them. I'm learning to listen now, not just to words, but to moments. The sound of the rain, the way the sun sets, the silence after dinner. I think I finally understand what you were trying to say." Sometimes I'd close my eyes and imagine his response. A soft chuckle, a simple, "That's my girl." There's a kind of healing that doesn't come from fixing things, but from accepting them. From realizing that love isn't measured by how loudly someone speaks, but by how quietly they stay. Daniel's love was quiet. Mine had been busy, but now, they'd finally met in the same silence. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping older couples with simple things, writing letters, recording stories, teaching them how to share what they never say out loud. Sometimes I'd tell them, "Don't wait until it's too late to listen." They'd smile, not fully understanding, but I'd see the way they looked at each other differently afterward. Maybe that's all I can do now. Pass on what he taught me. On what would have been our 24th anniversary, I went to the coast, the trip he always wanted. The sky was gray, the sea restless but beautiful. I stood by the shore, the wind pulling at my hair, and whispered, "We made it, Daniel." I scattered a few rose petals into the water. They floated for a while before disappearing into the waves, and then, maybe it was my imagination, I heard the faintest whisper of his voice in the wind. Thank you for listening. That night, back at the small inn by the sea, I opened his last letter again. I read it slowly, savoring every word. And this time, instead of pain, I felt gratitude. Because even though I hadn't heard him then, I could hear him now, in every memory, every letter, every quiet moment. He had left me not in silence, but in understanding. Life after loss doesn't come back all at once. It returns in pieces, small, unexpected, and sometimes almost shy. For me, it began with sound. The first sound that truly felt alive again was the rain. I remember sitting by the kitchen window one afternoon, watching droplets race down the glass. Daniel used to love the rain. He said it made everything pause long enough to breathe. I never understood what he meant until then. That afternoon, I sat in silence, listening. The steady rhythm of the rain against the roof, the soft tapping on the window. For the first time in months, I didn't cry. I just listened, and in that stillness, it felt like he was there, not haunting me, not as a ghost, but as a calm presence reminding me that peace could coexist with pain. A few days later, I began opening the windows again. At first, it was just for the air. Then I started to notice the world outside, birdsong, children playing, the distant hum of life continuing. The silence in my home no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space for new sounds, new beginnings. One morning, while cleaning the porch, I found Daniel's old gardening gloves. worn leather still faintly smelling of soil and grass. He used to spend hours in that garden, trimming, planting, humming under his breath. I slipped the gloves on. They were too big for me, but somehow they fit in a way that felt right. I started pulling weeds one by one, and with each weed I removed, it felt like I was clearing something inside myself too. The guilt, the regret, the endless what-ifs. I planted marigolds that day, his favorite. Bright, golden, and warm. When I finished, I sat back, brushed the dirt from my hands, and whispered, "Look, Daniel, they're listening to the sun." It's strange how grief teaches you to notice things. The texture of the wind, the way light moves through leaves, the small gestures that once went unseen. Every day, I found something new that made me feel closer to him, not in sadness, but in gratitude. One morning, I went to the local library, the same one where Daniel and I used to take the kids on weekends. There was a small community board near the entrance, and pinned to it was a flyer. Writing circle, share your story. Every Thursday evening, I almost walked past it. But then I thought about all the letters he had written, all the words he never got to say out loud. Maybe, I thought, it's time I start speaking too. The first evening I went, I was nervous. The group was small, 6 people sitting in a circle, each holding a notebook. When it was my turn, I hesitated. My voice trembled as I said, "My husband passed away recently. He left letters." "I've been reading them." The room grew still. No one interrupted. So I began to read one. Not the saddest one, but the one where he thanked me for our ordinary life. When I finished, there was silence. Then a woman across from me, her hair streaked with gray, said softly, "That's beautiful. You made him come alive again." Her words stayed with me. I realized that by sharing him, I wasn't letting go. I was letting him live through others. I started going every Thursday. Week by week, my voice grew steadier. The others began sharing too, stories of love, regret, forgiveness. We laughed, we cried, and somewhere between all those moments, healing began to take shape. One evening after class, the facilitator, Mr. Harper, handed me a sheet of paper. "I think you should submit this," he said, smiling. It was a short story competition for local writers, theme, letters that changed me. I laughed softly. "I'm not a writer," he smiled back. "Maybe you've just been one all along. You just didn't know you were listening." So I went home and wrote, really wrote. I poured my heart onto the page, not just about losing Daniel, but about the years before that. The missed dinners, the unspoken words, the quiet moments that I used to think were meaningless. I wrote about how love sometimes whispers, and how we must learn to hear it before it's gone. When I finished, I signed my name and mailed it. I didn't expect anything to come of it, but it felt good to finally give his story, our story, a voice. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. The return address said Community Journal. My heart raced as I opened it. "Dear Mrs. Turner, we're pleased to inform you that your story," he tried to tell me, but I wasn't listening, "has been selected for publication in our special issue on love and remembrance." I read the line over and over again. My hands trembled. And then I started to cry, not out of sadness, but out of something softer, lighter. It felt like Daniel had been with me the whole time, guiding my pen. That evening, I placed the published story beside his letters on the table. I lit a candle next to them and whispered, "We did it, love." As the candle flickered, a memory came back, a night from years ago when I had asked him, half-jokingly, "Do you think our story is worth telling?" He'd smiled and said, "Every story is, if someone's willing to listen." Now, I finally understood. Months passed. Life found its rhythm again, slower, simpler, quieter. I started teaching creative writing at the community center. At first, I thought I'd be too nervous to speak in front of people. But every time I felt afraid, I'd imagine Daniel sitting in the back row, smiling that calm, reassuring smile. I taught them what I'd learned, that stories aren't about perfect words, but about truth. That listening is a kind of love, and that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones whispered in silence. One afternoon after class, a young woman approached me. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Mrs. Turner," she said, "I read your story. I called my father last night after years of not speaking. I just listened. Thank you." Her words nearly broke me, because in that moment, I realized something Daniel had always known. Love doesn't end. it echoes. It travels through the lives it touches, finding new hearts to rest in. That evening, as I walked home, the sky began to change, the soft orange of sunset giving way to the deep blue of evening. I stopped for a moment and watched it, letting the wind brush past my face. It felt familiar, comforting, and in that quiet, I heard it again, his voice, faint but clear. "Keep going, Anna. You're listening now." I smiled through my tears. "Yes," I whispered. "I am." In the months that followed, I continued writing. Not always about him, but always with him in mind. I wrote about kindness, about slowing down, about the spaces between words. People began writing to me, strangers who had read my story and wanted to share theirs. A man wrote, "I wish I had listened to my wife before she left." A woman wrote, "Your story helped me forgive my mother." Each letter was a reminder that Daniel's voice hadn't just reached me, it had rippled outward, touching others too. Every anniversary, I still visit the sea. I bring a letter, sealed and written by hand, and let the waves take it. It's my way of speaking to him, of saying thank you for loving me even when I didn't know how to listen. Last year, as I stood by the water, I saw a young couple walking hand in hand, laughing. The girl leaned her head on the boy's shoulder, and he whispered something that made her smile. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Some things don't need sound to be understood. I turned back toward the horizon and said quietly, "You were right, Daniel. Love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape." The wind lifted gently, carrying the sound of the waves, a rhythm so steady, so alive it felt like an answer. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the same way I used to with him. The house was quiet. Outside, the stars shimmered faintly against the dark. I opened my notebook, the one we had shared, and wrote, "Today I taught a class about listening, not just with ears but with the heart. I told them about the man who loved quietly and the woman who learned too late, but still learned. I think you'd be proud, Daniel." I closed the book and smiled. And somewhere in the soft hum of the night, I could almost hear his laughter again. It's been 3 years now. Sometimes it feels like only yesterday. Other times, it feels like a lifetime ago. Another world, another me. The house is still the same. The same wooden floors, the same soft hum of the refrigerator at night, the same creak in the hallway near the study. But everything feels different. Not because it's quieter, but because I've learned to listen differently. I used to think silence meant absence. Now I know silence can also mean presence, the kind that wraps around you softly, asking for nothing in return. This morning, I woke up early. The world outside was painted in a faint blue light, the kind that comes just before sunrise. I made tea, jasmine his favorite, and stepped out to the garden. The marigolds I planted are in full bloom now, glowing like little suns against the earth. I sat down on the old wooden bench, the one he built years ago, and breathed in the cool air. There was a kind of stillness I hadn't known before, not heavy but peaceful. And then I began to speak, not out loud but inside, the way I always do when I talk to him. "I think I finally understand, Daniel. You were never asking me to be perfect. You just wanted me to be there. To listen, not with answers, not with logic, just with love." The wind moved through the marigolds, brushing against my arm as if to agree. For a moment, I closed my eyes and smiled. I still remember the last thing he said before he left that morning. It was simple. He looked back from the door and said, "I'll see you tonight." At the time, I barely lifted my eyes from the dishes. Now I understand that love hides in moments like that. The everyday ones we rush through. The ordinary sentences that mean everything once they're gone. If I could go back, I wouldn't fill the silence with words. I'd just look at him, really look, and say, "I'm listening." In the evenings, I often sit by the window where we used to read together. The light hits the same way, golden, soft, like a memory that refuses to fade. Sometimes I take out his letters and read them again. Not to reopen the wound, but to remind myself of how love sounds when it's patient. Each letter has its own rhythm. Pauses, spaces, the weight of what was left unsaid. I used to read them searching for guilt. Now I read them searching for grace. A few months ago, my story, our story, was featured in a local radio program. The host called me afterward and said, people are writing in. They say your story helped them talk to someone they'd been avoiding. That night, I sat alone and thought about that, about how Daniel's voice still ripples through the world. It made me cry, but not from sadness. It was the kind of crying that feels like rain, soft, cleansing, necessary. He tried to tell me while he was alive, and I didn't listen. But maybe, in another way, I'm listening now. Not just for myself, but for everyone who still has someone trying to reach them. Last week, a young man from my writing class stayed after the session. He was shy, maybe 25, and he looked nervous. He said, "Mrs. Turner, I've been fighting with my mom. I think I understand what your story means now. I'm going to call her tonight." I smiled at him and said, "That's good. Just let her talk. Don't fix it. Just listen." He nodded. As he left, I thought, maybe this is what Daniel wanted all along. Not for me to hold on to grief, but to turn it into something that helps someone else. Sometimes when I'm in the garden, I whisper to him, "I'm listening, love." And in small ways, I hear him back. Not in words, but in moments. The flicker of sunlight on a leaf, the way a bird pauses before it sings, the feeling of warmth when I least expect it. I don't need proof. I don't need signs. I just know he's there, part of the rhythm of life, part of the quiet spaces between sound. Tonight, as I write this final page, I realize something simple but profound. We spend so much of our lives trying to be heard, explaining, arguing, proving. But the real magic happens when we stop and listen. Listening is love in its gentlest form. It's what keeps us connected long after words are gone. If someone asked me now, "What did you learn from losing him?" I'd say, that love never stops speaking. We just have to slow down enough to hear it. I close my notebook, set my pen down, and glance toward the window. Outside, the sky is fading into night. I can hear the faint rustle of wind through the garden, the whisper of leaves brushing against each other. Somewhere deep in my heart, I hear him again, steady, kind, patient. "Thank you for listening." And for the first time, I answer, "You're welcome, my love." The candle flickers beside me, its light warm and alive. I sit there a while longer, just breathing, just being. Tomorrow the world will go on, with its noise, its laughter, its ordinary beauty. But tonight I am at peace, because even though he's gone, his voice remains, not as sound, but as understanding. And I know now that listening isn't about hearing words. It's about being present enough to feel the truth behind them. Final reflection, soft closing line. So if you're listening to this story tonight, I hope you pause for a moment. Call someone you love. Ask them how they really are. And when they answer, don't rush to speak. Just listen. Because sometimes love whispers so quietly that we only hear it once it's gone. And if you're lucky enough to still have the chance, don't wait. Listen now.